What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Metal Maniacs podcast, episode 1. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit why we started this show. And my name is Jason Ingersoll, and this is my co-host,
Nicholas J. Mod.
Yeah. I came up with the idea of this podcast because, I've been listening to heavy metal for almost 30 years now. I really wanted to discuss my love for metal and tell the stories of my metal heroes. I think we can do it in a format that hasn't really been done before. There's the interview style, and then there's a lot of different style of metal podcasts out there, but I kind of want to do some biographies, and you'll notice that there'll be some different
themes,
formats of the show. Yeah, so we'll do like the biographies, and then we'll deep dive into the stories of the bands, stuff like that, and then we'll probably do interviews with some local acts. We're gonna strive our way to get national acts and get bigger acts on there. Obviously, our first episode, we're just starting, and then we will do some topic shows and assorted shows, maybe discuss new releases, new albums, and different things like that. So we got a lot of stuff in mind. If you're into metal, I think you really like this show. Real quick, my backstory as far as metal goes, I remember kind of getting into metal when I was I was probably 12 or 11, and Dave brought over the Anthrax Attack of the Killer Bees album.
Yep.
And that got me in trouble because of the... Because my mom read the lyrics, and it was like, "You fucking whore, that's all you are." And then my mom didn't like that, so Dave's mom got a call, and we both got in trouble for having that. So thanks to Dave. But then he kind of got me into playing guitar in a roundabout way. Dave did. So when you get into playing guitar, you could go a few ways with that. You go the classic rock, or you can go the metal. So Dave was kind of starting to get me into some heavier stuff. And we started listening to, the normal things, Marilyn Manson, Ozzy at the time, those kind of things. And my first show was when I was 15. Dave's dad took us to go see Ozzy with Korn and Deftones.
Okay.
And that was like, Korn was just getting on the radar. So was Deftones. So it was kind of a wild show. Ozzy, Korn, and Deftones, it's like...
I was at that show, and I had not heard of Deftones until they were announced on the bill. And I was mispronouncing it, calling them the Deathtones, thinking they were, before even hearing one note, they are God's gift of music to me.
So what'd you think? I mean...
I couldn't understand one note of the Deftones. I just saw Chino screaming and jumping and dreads going everywhere. Same with Stephen Carpenter on the guitar. Just dreads everywhere, and just... there was energy, and I thought to myself, I'm going home to check them out.
Oh, nice.
Like, absolutely, I'm looking into that band.
Nice. So were you familiar with Korn then when you went there?
That's the whole reason we went.
Really?
That I went.
Okay.
I went with Gunderman and another friend of mine, Chris Miller, from high school. So it was... and Gunderman's mom drove us.
Okay, yeah.
That was hilarious because we didn't know where we were going, and we just pull up at a stoplight and a red light, roll down the windows, and there's, just some kids passing by. And I'm like, "You guys know where Wing Stadium is?" Just asking where they go, and they're like, "Not really." And I'm like,
"We're from here, but not really."
Yeah, nope, keep going, you'll find it. Like, thanks, never mind.
Yeah, right. So with that being said, yeah, Dave's dad took us, and then he went to the movies while we were at the show, and then he just waited in the parking lot till it got done. So that was kind of cool, like, to do that for us, just like, okay, kids, go ahead and go in there, whatever's going on in there. Yeah. I do remember seeing some boobies there too, so I was pretty happy about that when Ozzy went on. So
that's par for the course for an Ozzy show.
Yeah, for sure. And then as things progressed, you and I met each other, and I don't through Dave?
Through Dave.
Really?
Through Dave.
Okay.
And Dan, they were getting me into music at the same time.
Okay.
They were massaging my brain with GNR and Metallica.
Oh, yeah. So then we started our band, Nailed. Mm-hmm. We were like 15, 16, right? Because we were just starting to drive, and then just started getting to heavier stuff. Then you started introducing me to heavier shit like Death, Carcass, because that stuff was kind of... So I remember Garvey and that used to listen to Slayer a lot, and they listened to like 6 Feet Under, Slayer, stuff like that. And then I remember he's like, "Borrow this," and it was Cannibal Corpse, The Bleeding. I was scared as shit of it. I didn't know what the hell. I was reading the lyrics. I was like, "What is this? This is too much for me," at the time. Yeah. Then you started showing me Death and Carcass. Then I started getting into that. Then obviously, once you go further back into Carcass discography, then it starts getting a little scarier. So starting with Heartwork is easing your way in, right?
Right.
And then, since then, to this day, been listening to music. We played several shows. Obviously, our band, Infinite Design, we've played tons of shows. We continue to go to shows. You together, alone, whatever, we anticipate new releases, and I try to read everything I can about metal online. I'm really obsessed with it, and this is kind of, all goes back to why I started this podcast, because I realized my love for metal, it just kind of never goes away. And one thing, we talked about the Gary V, I showed you his podcast, and when he says, like, if you have a problem coming up with content, like, it's not really for you. And I kind of felt like over the last handful of years, I was like striving to like come up with things, right? And then I'm just like thinking, well, what's my roots? What's whatever? And then now I just have so many ideas because of my love for metal. It's just easy to come up with stuff, right? So what about you? What was your story? I know we kind of went into a little bit, but
no, it's cool. I was actually surprised to learn that your backstory and gateway into metal was very similar to mine. I took it as you had some other introduction to metal, whatever it was. I was unaware of, actually. I just figured it was through Dave. But Anthrax, same, but not through Dave, our friend. My uncles were all into metal, especially my Uncle Ryan. He had the Rust in Peace poster. He had the I'm the Man poster, and he had extra tapes laying around. I noticed that he had like 2 copies of the cassette tape I'm the Man, the original, like that 86, 87 single.
That's like an EP, right?
Yeah, so okay. I took that. I just was like, he's got 2 of them. I don't even know that he'd missed one of them, whatever. So I just, sorry, Uncle Ryan, I stole that from you.
Yeah.
I probably gave it back in the end of the day. I don't know. But I started listening to that, and the I'm the Man single isn't great, and they had an edited version on there for God knows what reason. Like, nobody needs that. Half the track is bleeped out, like, no good. Then they had a live version, which is kind of fun, but what really got me hooked are the other songs on it. Like, they covered Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath by Black Sabbath, and they just made it like 10 times heavier than it ever was. I mean, it's Black Sabbath. You don't have to try too hard to make it heavier.
Right.
Just bring it up to like modern tones and modern production value, and it's just instantly heavier without even trying. But just Charlie's double bass on it, pitter patter, just like it was fresh, and Joey's vocals were, they were more like Ronnie James Dio than Ronnie James Dio.
Right,
Like it was a really good track. So that I'm the Man single got me into it. Rust in Peace was another tape I had, delivering papers on the paper route. I just plug it into the headset. And then, it wasn't too much longer that I had met you. I mean, we kind of knew each other from school, but we started hanging out more through Dave. And I know I just wanted to play music. Like, music was just becoming a bigger and bigger part of my life. I was not into the sports as much anymore. I remember it was about going into freshman year of high school. I brought a bass guitar, like, basically into that school year. That's when music started to take form for me in deeper senses. Getting into heavier metal, Pantera maybe was the next gateway after because the screams,
seems sensible. Yep.
Yeah, and then
and the groove and the heaviness of it. Yeah,
and just attitude. Yeah, just anger, and I related to that a lot. And it wasn't much longer after that I had the Columbia House and the BMG music. So I started reading everything in there, and whatever they'd compare stuff to, if it sounded like something I'd listen to, I'd get it. And so it was Death and Carcass, like the same order. And they both arrived, and I was so surprised at Jeff Walker's voice on that Carcass album. I was like, how is he doing that? What effect is that?
Right.
I thought that was a pedal.
Yeah.
I thought you could do that with special effects.
Yeah.
I was like, he's not really doing that.
Right.
Like, what is that? But nope, that's his real voice.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew. I was like, that's what we have to do. That's what I have to do. That's what I'm doing. So those
makes sense.
Those are the albums that got me. And I think that's about the time we started hanging out too, and just decided we were, once I was into those bands and we were hanging out playing, it wasn't but, within that first year that we had our first band going, like, basically emulating those sounds. So that's the story of how I came to metal. I mean, there was music before Anthrax, but Anthrax was the first metal band. They were the gateway band for me.
Yeah.
Megadeth followed, like with Symphony of Destruction. Those 2 albums are not closely linked on the timeline. Like, I'm the Man is several years before Symphony of Destruction, but I probably got that tape like well after it was out, right? Probably closer to 90, 91. Right about the time the Attack of the Killer Bees came out. I was probably just ahead of that. You know?
That's the beautiful thing about metal, is because things had come out years ago, and then you can discover it now. And then it's like still new to you, and then it's like still resonates in a certain way, so. Well, nice. Is that about it then? I mean, that's kind of where you're at, and then here we are now, and
pretty
playing
much
in bands together and going to shows and still loving metal, and
Yeah, I mean, I kind of drifted away from metal for a time, which I don't want people to automatically stop listening now.
This podcast is a phony.
Yeah, I think so when you're looking at like where you begin, you also kind of find your way all the way through it, and then you get to music where you're like, okay, it's a little bit beyond the pale here. Like you've got some super tech death metal out there that's just like, okay, these guys are relentless. The adrenaline is, oh my God, over the top. The drums, like, there's so much more. Like music has come so far since when we were into that.
Right.
Like we were listening to the most extreme thing at the time.
Yeah.
And now it's come to a place where it's like, okay, black metal, like super symphonic orchestrated black metal over the top. I can palate some of that. That's fine.
Right.
But you get to a point where you're like, I just don't want to only listen to metal. And, people, and it becomes harder to talk to people about music if that's all that you do. Because it's like metal's like music, I should say, is like, like a mood. Are you going to stay in that mood all the time? As positive as you can maintain it, it's still like, it's just super high energy and super intense all the time. Right. So I started to get into other things that metal introduced to me through metal, right? Like Century Media, right?
Okay, yeah.
So Devin Townsend and his collection. So other things start. So metal has brought me a whole world of other music to like chill out, the heavy mellow, if you will. Yeah. So that, and now I'm back to, since I've been in town again for another 15, 16 years. Right. I can't believe it's been that long. But yeah, I've been into metal since working with you again, like in ways that we used to be. Right. I was finding other rock music, other atmospheric stuff to listen to round out my listening. But metal, I'm always going to have love and appreciation for deeply, in every day. Like I've been listening to Death again, just plowing through it, and Control Denied, giving it new, fresh listens. You know what I mean? So
I think that's what happens with a lot of like metal listeners for the most part. You'll find few and far between metal guys that only listen to metal, especially guys that plays in bands, because you need other outlets and you start to grow as a person and as a human. And maybe when we're 16 and full of angst and that's all we care about is fucking metal and that's all we want to hear, then our parents are like, what is this shit? Like, what's the matter with you? But then as you grow as a person, like you need other, you have other moods, you explore other avenues. But when you're just pissed off between 16 and 21, that's all you care about, right? So now that we're older, it all kind of makes sense, So, but with that being said, calling this podcast the Metal Maniacs podcast, so it'll probably be called the Metal Maniacs, just so we're not completely ripping it off. I got a few issues here, but with that being said, that's the funny thing is about that. I don't want to get too far off on a tangent. I had a whole tote full of those things, and influence from the wife. She's like, "You don't read those things. You need to get rid of them." So I ended up dumping them, and they're all gone. And now I'm like, "Oh man, I shouldn't have got rid of them." But it is what it is. They weren't really doing anything anyway. But
Sad.
Before we had the internet, this is what we had to learn about our favorite bands, right?
Oh yeah.
We had Metal Edge, Metal Hammer, which were
hard rock.
Yeah, hard rock, and that was never really my thing.
Glam metal.
Yeah, glam metal, butt rock, shit like that. So this magazine in particular really stood out because they always covered more of the darker, heavier underground bands that I liked. Because I could pick up Metal Edge and maybe find one article in there of a band that I kind of liked, and all that other Bon Jovi and shit, I didn't care about none of that, right? That just wasn't my style. If it's you, it's for you, cool, but it's not for me. So, I like all kinds of metal, but this was my shit right here. The underground, the heavy, the black metal, even stuff in these magazines covered stuff that I wasn't even quite into yet. It was still a little beyond my scope,
Cover to cover, Metal Maniacs magazine was the best thing for metalheads. It had so much more than acts you haven't heard of yet. It just had ways of communicating with other fans. It just got independent bands noticed by other venues, There's a lot of things that it brought to the fan base of metal music besides your favorite popular, and all metal acts through and through. No hard rock, no radio friendly anything, no Korn, no Papa Roach, no. Like Metal Maniacs through and through is metal, like to the bone, to the core, metal for metalheads, and they didn't really rely on commercial success to put their magazine out. There were enough metalheads that drifted to it and said, "Oh yeah, can't wait for the next one to come out and see if anybody replies to my ad."
Right.
You know, reading the ads
pen
was
pals
super entertaining, just in and of itself, worth the script price. You know, I mean. Yeah, just reading some of those. I remember just being bored and reading them, and then we'd find one and laugh out loud about it. Like, dude, check this guy out. Is this a real person? Yeah.
You know, I bought every single issue. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like, once in a while, you'd almost see Pantera on it. And, although I loved Pantera, I would be like, wow, this is kind of like commercial for, Metal Maniacs, like, or they would touch a little bit here on stuff. Like, obviously, this issue right here, they have like Soulfly on here, and you're kind of like, well, I mean, that's even kind of commercial for them, almost.
Still metal, though.
Yeah, still metal. So, but getting into that, let's talk a little bit about this magazine as far as, some actual facts on it. So, it was founded in 1989 by Mike Jean Greenblatt and Catherine Ludwig of Metal Shop. So, Catherine Ludwig, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but originally, it was a Sterling publication. It was acquired by Zenbu Media in February 2007. The magazine's editorial board was focused in Manhattan, New York City, and published 10 issues per year. Metal Maniacs focused predominantly on thrash metal, death metal, black metal, grindcore, and later more hardcore bands, and aimed to treat metal fans like human beings that might possibly have something to say. Direct quote from Ludwig herself. I bought every issue. I remember the sections of new bands to check out. I would always read those and like the reviews, so that was always stuff. It was kind of nice later on when we had the internet, we could actually look up these bands, because at this time it's like, where am I going to get my hands on this? I can only go by what the word is in the magazine,
You'd have to buy the CD.
Exactly, yeah. And sometimes that was a bummer. Judas Iscariot, shit like that.
I mean, it's still a word. God damn it. It's still worth the price because we can still laugh about Judas Iscariot all these years later. I can just see the artwork. I could see the corpse paint.
Fucking grim, bro.
I could hear the Radio Shack recording every instrument at the same time.
Just the fucking off time, everything. And
oh, what's another one? Mortician couldn't do it.
Yeah, those guys are held in high regard amongst a lot of death metal heads, especially old
Maybe
school, when you get into that gore grind type shit, porno grind. That was kind of the standout stuff. But yeah, I couldn't really get it. I remember you had that CD, and we were just kind of like, what the drum machine fuck is this?
I mean, and there's a lot of metal. Like, look, I ain't trying to hose it, but it's just not for me.
Right.
And you just go about your way, finding what you like and what you don't. But I do remember getting some things that were just noisy as fuck, like just bass distortion maxed and just buzzsaw, and you're like, what even is this? Is music. It's like, it's hard to believe that you can listen to one style of metal very similar, death metal, and then just kind of move over to the next band, and they're also calling themselves death metal, but it's not for me, but it's basically noise. But that's how it used to be, right? You'd have to just go on the word of it, what it says, and then, do I want to buy this, yes or no?
Yeah, hit the record store, believe in music, whatever it may be, But with that being said, they had the pen pal section, which was always fucking comical because there's some prison dude in there looking for only female pen pals. So if you guys don't know and you're new listening to this podcast, we got to remember not everybody's as old as us, and hopefully a lot of our people that will listen to this will realize that a pen pal was actually when you would write someone and they would write you back, actual letters. It was like the form of communication, personal communication. It was kind of like a want ad for like a pen pal, right? And, long before the communication that we have now with easy social media access and everything. But it was always a male prisoner 39 looking for female pen pal that's into porno grind and like all this weird shit. But that was always a great, section too. There was the letter section and serious discussions about the metal scene. And Ludwig also used the publication as a personal pulpit of sorts, stating, quote, "I also like to get in something about vegetarianism, hemp feminism, and freedom of speech when I could." So with that being said, when I read that quote from her, that's news to me, because I'd never, reading the issue front to back, I never really got any of those, like, her like I guess you could say her like agenda in there or whatever. Like I never really realized that. I think it was just more freedom of expression. But I mean, yeah, she probably covered some vegan bands, you know, or straight edge bands, shit like that, and you know. But I never really got that, even though it does say when I could, but.
I think she probably slipped it in there where it made sense to the listeners and to the fans in metal music. Like, so for fans maybe not awares, and we'll probably come back to this band again and again, you know, Carcass, group full of vegetarians.
Yeah.
And so when you're reading those lyrics and you don't know that, you're just like, what the hell are they talking about?
Right.
But having read other interviews about the band, them discussing their own lyrics at times, a lot of it is just about, like, meat processing and manufacturing and looking at the world through the eyes of a vegetarian.
Right.
And so if in their articles, in their magazines, Ludwig is talking about vegetarianism with a band who's vegetarian, makes sense.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, you're going to talk about saving the rainforest with Gojira, makes sense.
Right.
Saving the oceans with Gojira, makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, you know,
Yeah.
keep it on point. I never felt like there was an agenda throughout the magazine either.
Yeah. So that's why I was kind of surprised when I read that quote, because I was just like, I guess the way you put it is a different, you know, aspect of it for sure. So in February 2009, it was announced that publisher Zinbu Media would cease publication of Metal Maniacs, along with the magazine's larger, more renowned sister publication, big emphasis on sister, Metal Edge. The company did not issue a statement to its readers nor issue any refunds for subscribers. Associate editor J.J. Coxzan went to found his own online magazine, The Obelisk, in January 2009. In 2010, the website of the magazine was online again with new management of metalhit.com. In December 2011, 211 Media Incorporated purchased Metal Maniacs with Metal Edge from Zinbu. 211 Media was thought to be rolling out Metal Maniacs along with Metal Edge in electronic online formats, which got popular, you know, the more the internet came along and magazines kind of fell by the wayside because there's very few anymore at the store, you know.
Yeah, 2011, you're talking about, what, 3 years after Facebook rollout, maybe 4 years, something like that?
Yeah, real close to that, you know. So obviously they wanted to add increased access and functionality to both magazines, probably more of an open forum because you're getting the AOL online where you're talking forums and stuff where you got that direct, you know, feedback and contact with other people. Says Metal Maniacs was existing under metalmaniacs.com, but if you go to the website now in July 2023, which I just did, it does not belong to anyone, and you can buy it on GoDaddy.com. So maybe I should buy that.
Maybe we should start a GoFundMe for it. Who knows how much it costs?
Oh, it's probably just, you know, whatever.
It's probably dirt cheap.
Yeah, because you
just buying the domain.
.com.
Yeah,
Yeah, so domain $7 to $11 or whatever.
Right.
And then as I was digging more into this, because I was really wanted to get into it, because it said it was republished, you know, in 2011 online, such and such. I can't find anything about that. So I couldn't find anything on. I typed in 11 Media and the republication.
211?
11 Media.
Oh, 211 Media, right?
Oh, 211 Media.
Okay.
Excuse me. But yeah, and it says I cannot find anything about it. I looked it up. I tried to, you know.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't really know. This is just what I read, so I don't really know what happened to it. It's not out there anywhere in circulation. So, you know. So then I started digging into the founders. I knew more about Catherine, and we'll talk a little bit more about her in a second. But when I was looking up some info about Mike G, I did find his LinkedIn page where it states, longtime music journalist for the Aquarian Weekly, Goldmine, Closer, Rock, Grooves, Hit Parader, Metal Edge, and dozens of other magazines. Co-founder of Metal Maniacs, Modern Screen's country music, and one-shots on Led Zeppelin, Ricky Martin, Elvis Presley, 100 years of country music, and more. So he must have wrote a lot about all types of music. So he co-founded the Metal Maniacs, but it looks like that, you know, like I said, his LinkedIn page, we could probably contact him if we wanted to, I'm sure. So maybe that would be something for an episode down the road, you know.
If he were even to reply in an email and give us any kind of information on what exactly happened with the magazine at the end of its production and why they didn't decide to keep going online with it, because there's plenty online now. I subscribe to nearly all of them. Loudwire.
Oh yeah,
Blabbermouth. Just there's a bunch of Lambgo. There's a bunch of them, and I make sure that they're all in my feed. And Metal Maniacs should be one of them,
right?
And that they're not. We're just gonna pick up that bit of that mantle, a piece of that, and flex it, because I still like my metal every day. It's just a part of my routine. My routine in and out of every day is going to have metal music in it.
Oh yeah.
So I wouldn't mind picking his brain on what happened to that Metal Maniacs publication, and if he were to reply, that'd be super sweet.
I think that's definitely something we should look into for sure, and we will. So with that being said, if you go to Decibel magazine, they actually have a great oral history of Metal Maniacs. It's kind of like a conversation between Mike G, and there are several quotes in there between him and Catherine and Decibel magazine. It's not really like a history or story per se. It's just kind of like a bunch of like little blurbs of like kind of what they're talking about. But he says that Mike G, he says the whole thing was an experiment by a very business-minded Sterling. So I'm assuming Sterling Publications. Predicated on brisk sales of Guns N' Roses One Shot, a photo magazine called Metal Studs, and a few more picture-based top list titles. Metal Maniacs sported the photo-heavy innards of its forebears, but also featured original, engaging content in line with its European counterparts. If the magazine failed to sell, they'd write it off. But that's not how the story goes. Metal Maniacs sold very well. Sure, its initial existence is owed to Sterling's wide distribution network, where it piggybacked off the publisher's other lifestyle magazines, but the Heavy Metal Republic responded with their wallets and hearts. You're welcome. And at the time, no magazine like Metal Maniacs existed that was commercially viable and respected, meant just as much to the editorship as it did to the back office bean counters. So if you want to read more about that, we're not going to go through and read the whole oral history. There's just a lot of information there. So if that's something you guys are interested in, then please check it out. You can get into it a little bit more. But yeah, I guess that did help being able to be on all the newsstands with their wide publishing, because if not, it was a little 12-page black and white magazine that some guys like me and you put together with some photocopied shit. You know what I mean?
And we've seen those.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like we've owned several of those. Like guys that wanted to start a zine and they're passing them out at shows, and you're like, yeah, I'll read it, and they were good.
Yeah,
but they're nothing compared to the power that was invested into Metal Maniacs magazines. Just the photo shoots, the articles, the additional things that a regular local zine just not going to be able to do.
Exactly. So I think that, that helped for us because it got it into our hands too. It made it viable for us to read about these bands that we liked, and they did an amazing job. So, and that's why we're here. So we'll go into a little bit about Catherine Ludwig. Unfortunately, she was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and plenty of her friends in the medical community set up pages and tried to spread her word. They could donate to help her with with her medical costs and allow her to get treatment as she needed. Unfortunately, the founder, editor, Catherine Ludwig, she died Friday, January 30th, 2015, a little after 1 p.m. in New York. She passed very quickly and peacefully, surrounded by family and friends. That was just a direct quote out of something I found online. And obviously that's very unfortunate when it's, I remember when it happened, I was just like pretty devastated myself because she was the power behind of a lot of my youth, a lot of the things that I've learned through metal. And, it was sad to hear. And so I'm going to go into a little bit about, just about some of the stuff, like her impact, and a little bit about some of the things that some other people said about her. And then we'll probably wrap this up, but I got a little bit here about some, and these are just direct quotes. A lot of this stuff came off of different things online. Decibel magazine pulled a little bit off Wikipedia, so this isn't stuff I'm just making up here, but
liar,
right?
Well, this guy in a podcast said this has got to be true,
right? Yeah, exactly.
No reason to smear her name. I'm trusting all the sources here, but what did they say about Catherine?
So basically, Corrosion of Conformity, which cool band, always liked those guys.
Love them.
Reed Mullen. he had to say this about Catherine Ludwig. I'm not sure if folks know today just how instrumental Catherine was in introducing and exposing your typical metal maniac of the early 90s to so many badass bands. A lot of them, like COC, had never been given an audience like that before. We had been in fanzines with circulations of maybe a couple hundred, kind of what you and I were just talking about. But Metal Maniacs was thousands and thousands, a great advocate for little-known underground metal. As well as hardcore punk bands, she promoted the Blind album, their album, to the point where by the end of the year, it was virtually on everyone's top 10 metal albums of 91. So he's basically attributing her success in this magazine and her talking about their band in this magazine. It says, he continued, I cannot overstate how important she was to Corrosion of Conformity's success. Without her, Blind wouldn't have sold what it did. And after that, I don't think it's a stretch to say there probably would have never been a Deliverance album, which Deliverance was Clean My Wounds and Albatross,
that's
right?
how everybody knows them, basically. Yeah,
right.
I mean, hardcore COC fans are definitely going to know the first album, Blind. I'm not even very familiar with it. I pick up with everybody else when they blew up on Deliverance.
Yeah,
and so,
Clean My Wounds, and that was kind of some of the first stuff that I was getting into too with metal. So
to put it into context, Metal Maniacs, you didn't have Facebook, MySpace, nothing, barely AOL, barely, right? Like late 90s, but it wasn't the internet wasn't what it is now. So when Reed Mullins says, thanks to Metal Maniacs, there was a second Corrosion of Conformity album, he's 100% spot on. You go with the hot-handed media and they pick up your album and start promoting it, you can expect to get the kind of traction. And that's what Metal Maniacs was originally, when it was in publication. It was, you wanted to be in Metal Maniacs, even if it was a bit of a niche market magazine. It had a real diehard following of fans that were devout to the music and they wanted to consume everything they could. And Corrosion of Conformity, owing success to Metal Maniacs, that still resonates today with other media and newer bands coming up.
Yeah, for sure. So, Danny Lilker.
He was in Anthrax.
Was he?
Yeah, he was the original bassist before Frank.
No kidding. Then he got into Nuclear Assault, Brutal Truth, so a little bit heavier shit, it sounds like. And what he said is, it was extreme sadness that I learned about the passing of former Metal Maniacs editor Catherine Ludwig, who tragically lost her bout with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma on January 30th. Quote, it is fair to say that bands like Brutal Truth and anyone else who flew the flag of extremity in the 90s would not have gotten the acclaim and exposure that they received without the rabid and continued support of Metal Maniacs. So I don't think I'm going to go into all this because there is actually quite of a bit here. The 90s were, in fact, a good time for extreme metal and death metal, black metal, grindcore flourishing. And by reading most metal mags back then or by watching MTV or VH1, these mags and channels only seemed to feature grunge and new metal, while many Metal Maniacs refused to pander to those who championed watered-down and commercialized forms of heavy music that dominated this era. So that was kind of another quote by him, and kind of the same thing. He's just reiterating what he says. He takes a little stab at Papa Roach here, which I don't think is necessary to bring up. But I get where he's coming from because, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next episode too. And when I go into more of the death metal, because that'll be our next episode, we're going to just kind of talk about the genre death metal. That'll be our next one, kind of a bio on death metal. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's never been a commercial thing. So like going back to kind of what you said, where it's just like you go where the hot hand is and where you get in where you fit in kind of thing too, because Metal Maniacs was your place to have your music. If it was featured, you were lucky, and there was a lot of readers of that magazine because there is a market for this extreme metal.
Absolutely.
Still to this day, right?
Commercial or not, people still want to have heavy extreme music available to them. Yep,
exactly. So another Jeremy Wagner from Broken Hope quoted, I first met Catherine Ludwig in 1990 at Milwaukee Metal Fest. We'll talk a little bit about that too. I think that might be a cool episode to go over. I was kind of starting to dive into a little bit of that, maybe the history of Milwaukee Metal Fest. Cool how Josta brought it back last year. So that's also something that if they have it again, I feel like it's something that it's a must go to for me. But he said that Catherine was an editor at Metal Maniacs magazine at the time. Catherine, along with her amigo
Borovage Kurjan.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Put Broken Hope on the map in a big way as they featured the Broken Hope demos and our photo in the Firing Squad section of Metal Maniacs. So Firing Squad, that was kind of what we were talking about, like how to kind of get your band, the underground bands. I remember that Firing Squad was an actual, section of the magazine. So Broken Hope came up in there. So, or Brutal Truth, excuse me. Broken Hope, I'm sorry.
Same band.
Same
Who knows?
band. Broken Hope, Brutal Truth, Sorry about that, guys. And, he said he credits that exposure to getting our first record deal and for turning Broken Hope onto thousands of fans before we even had our first album out. For that, I was always grateful. So that's pretty cool.
Even today, thousands of fans out of the gate. That would be assuming they're not bots. Assuming they're like genuine, authentic reach. That's still amazing. Back then, that's incredible, man.
So, like I said, I probably won't go into all of this here. There's a lot of quotes about Catherine, and I suggest that if you want to, get into more of her story, please do. We're here to kind of just go over the nuts and bolts of it. But there's a lot of people that attributed their success in extreme metal to Catherine Ludwig, and it just goes to show that because of her and because of the magazine, a lot of these bands kind of really got their notoriety, more or less, So
they got their exposure and their career on track in large part because of a magazine that was committed to metal music and wasn't really selling out to ad space or what was popular in the mainstream at the time. Metal Maniacs, like you said, there was a time of the grunge movement, and Metal Maniacs was still like just not even paying attention to that. You weren't looking at Bush or you weren't even looking at Alice in Chains in Metal Maniacs. And no. I'm sure they're pretty revered in the metal community at most metalheads, many like Alice in Chains, but they weren't in this magazine and they weren't pandering to that crowd. There wasn't a Soundgarden. There wasn't a Pearl Jam on the cover, even in the pages anywhere. If it wasn't metal and dare I say even like, somewhat old school, but they would stay on top of the new stuff and whatever that was at the time. If it was Fear Factory or, they wouldn't dive into the, I wouldn't have seen him diving into like the new metal thing. I don't know.
No,
Mudvayne, Slipknot.
Really.
But
anything that kind of had some commercial success, it was kind of not in there. But with that being said, now bands, well, R.I.P. Dillinger, but like I remember reading about Dillinger when they first came out in there. So they started getting into, as metal evolved and changed, into the Kill Switches and the Shadows Fall and the Dillingers and like more of that hardcore metalcore,
Meshuggah would have been coming up.
Yeah, exactly. The gent stuff, all that, like it started to go into more of that. So it kind of kept up with the trends too. So it didn't just cover, mayhem and fucking death and that's it. It didn't
only do one specific style or one timeline of metal. It kept up with the changing times. And that's why I wish it were here still, just to have a reliable source of new metal through and through, but we do what we're doing our best out here.
Yeah,
we still got sources.
Yeah. So in 2012 interview for Decibel magazine's Women Metal issue, Ludwig said, "A lot of people tell me that by Metal Maniacs not being one-dimensional, it made them feel less alone. Like they weren't the only metalheads in the world who wasn't sexist and read books, and they actually questioned authority instead of just complaining about it. People have told me that they became vegetarian, vegan, or feminist, or starting voting because of the magazine. All this floors me, stuns me, slays me, and I still can't believe it." So even beyond the music, I guess the magazine really made an impact on culture and people. That's how important it was. Quote here from Elisa Morgan, who worked as Ludwig's assistant and editor for several issues of Metal Maniacs. She was the one that kind of helped raise funds to help annihilate her cancer. It says, "I will write a proper message when I can get my head around the fact that my dear friend is truly gone. For now, just let me say that she truly was thankful for all the support she got from everyone here and told me many times how much it touched her and that so many people cared." So, obviously it's a tragic situation that would happen to her because, for her to see metal now and probably be at the festivals and, I'm sure she would still be a big part of it because it sounded like it was really, in her blood and, in her veins to do right by the metal community and be a spokesperson for, the underground, the less commercial bands. So
it sounds like that sentiment carried over to her thoughts on people and culture as well. Like she was making room for all sorts of either outcasts or, dare I say, minorities or people that just felt like they didn't have a community. She was welcoming in those people into the metal community. And I think that's kind of what metal has always supposed to have been about, is to be more inclusive, is so as to say, like, it's okay that you're different. Come on in here and mosh with us or headbang with us. And she was making room for other people too. And they probably liked metal. And within that metal community, maybe started to feel ostracized as it became more, as it would seem to be more driven by just males, and
right.
Straight white men, right?
Oh,
You hear all the time, right?
Yeah.
But metal isn't supposed to be that. It's supposed to be music. I'll just broaden it to music in this sense. Like, it's supposed to be a collective of people, and I think she did a really good job of bringing in people into the metal community by just being open to all walks of life. So that's pretty cool in my opinion as well. Sorry if I drifted from the mic there.
No, it's all good. So like I said, it was unfortunate, and to say she gave her life to metal, it'd be an understatement, but her impact and I feel like, Mike G, he did awesome because he helped, bring up the magazine as well. He was a co-founder, but it didn't sound like metal was quite his thing as much as it was Ludwig's. You know what I'm saying? Like, she was kind of really the driving force behind that. Where I tried to find more information about Mike, and obviously the information that I did find, he had his hands in a lot of different things. I think he was, obviously it'd be cool to try to reach out to him and talk to him and get his opinion on it for sure. Because I don't want to speak on him, but just in my opinion, it just seemed like he was part of it, but he was more of a, let's just say he was more of a person that like probably enjoyed music and wanted to write about it as much as he could. Like, he kind of had his hands in a lot of different pots, so to speak.
It sounds like a music journalist and a guy who helped facilitate Metal Maniacs and had the connections, whereas it was more, Ludwig's vision of how the magazine should roll out and unfold, and he was a participatory person in that, even if he wasn't the head of that. But I'm curious to find out more, like, who and how things were run, who ran it and how they ran it.
Right. Well, with that being said, obviously, it's a magazine forever live in our hearts. We got episodes here.
Plenty of copies at home.
Right, yeah. We're dedicating our podcast to kind of just try to carry the torch of this magazine. Hopefully, we can reach some impact and talk about a lot of the metal heroes that were featured in this magazine, and I personally want to keep this podcast more underground as much as possible. There's plenty of things out there about the commercial guys, the Ozzy Osbournes and all that. But, let's, my main focus with this podcast is to tell you guys stories about all of our heroes. But obviously we had to start with the foundation here of why we're doing this. And then obviously, talk about the magazine and its impact. So, with that being said, hopefully we'll carry the torch and be able to do the same, at least talk about these topics, and we'll have a lot of different content to put out there, and it's something that we hope to keep going. And like I said, the next episode, I hope you guys tune in. My mission is to talk about just the genre death metal because it spawns so many things. So that's kind of the next one. And then we're going to start diving into more specific bands. I know you have a few on the plate that you'll be throwing in there.
Oh, yeah. I could list right now. We're going to talk about Death. We're going to talk about Chuck Schuldiner specifically. We're going to talk about Warrel Dane and Nevermore. I definitely have to touch on Carcass. Again, that band name, you're going to hear it a lot. I don't know if it'll be as popular as Megadeth and Dangerville's podcast. Shout out to Dangerville. Love you guys. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, we'll have a counter going of the number of times I say Carcass. It's fun to say. We got plenty of bios we can do, Jay.
Yep.
So
yeah,
one at a time, I'm sure.
Yep. So like I said, with this podcast, we'll be doing the bios. We'll be doing some episodes to break it up in between too. We're going to talk about just maybe some new releases. We're going to talk about some other theme things too. So we'll be releasing a couple bios a month, and we really hope you guys, tune in, sub, whatever you guys are listening to this on. If you want to give us a review, give us 5 stars, whatever, just so we can get this into the ears of our fellow metalheads. And I know there's other metal podcasts out there. I listen to a lot of podcasts, man, but I haven't heard one that will be like ours. So the nice thing is, as of now, we're kind of, on the echelon of doing our own thing, so
I'm excited to have local bands on here. Yep. I really want to talk to guys that are out there doing it and getting gigs and telling us, what's good and what's not good and what needs to change. And just, we've done it. We've been out there, and I want to get the younger kids in here and talk about their bands and just hear what I'm not hearing, because I don't get out to every show. I think that's the coolest thing about being able to do this right now is, like, if you got a band and you made it this far into this podcast, you need to be hitting us a message up real quick right now, because we want to have you on like as fast as we can. I want to hear your music. I think that's the biggest thing here is Jay and I just put out an album. Why? Because I had to have it. I had to have the music first. So if you're a music fan and a musician, you're going to want to dig this podcast, because we're going to pump your band up too.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another thing I've been loving about this. I've been trying to expose myself and take more time to listen to metal, whereas before, even explore some bands that maybe I haven't before, just to give it fresh ears, kind of like you were saying when you were listening to the Death and, the Control Denied, just listen to it after you haven't for so long. It kind of, you hear new things and we also grow as people, as we were talking about. Our tastes change a little bit. And then, that's the other one point that I want to make before we wrap this up is, I've been, let me speak for myself. I don't want to speak for you, but I mean, I know you well enough to know that I've been the gatekeeper. I've been the guy that's like, oh, fuck that, or blah, blah, blah. Never gave it a chance, or it wasn't exactly the most, underground thing, or, whatever. And I want to get rid of all that on this podcast. I just want to let everything fly. I want to be positive, and I want to, speak out and, give the metal community a voice and speak through us and with us. And that way we can, hopefully reach as many people and, carry the torch. So like I said, make sure you tune in, sub to this podcast. We'll be on YouTube. We'll be on Spotify. So if you'd like to listen, it'll be right there for your ears. If you want to watch, we'll be on YouTube, and we got a lot more stuff coming to you guys. And, it really helps us grow. So if you want to share it with a fellow friend or episode, Nick and I will do the groundwork to try to get this podcast in as many ears as possible. But, you got anything else to say, man?
Can't wait for the next episode, fam.
Okay. Hell yeah, I bet. Yeah, it was a good time. It was a lot of fun. So this is going to be cool. And until next time, keep it metal, my friends. Peace.